to this episode of Musically Cogitating, a podcast about the relevance and importance of living and contemporary music of all kinds and how that music impacts our everyday lives. I am your host, Ciyadh Wells. Thank you so much for joining me here today. And today I wanted to cogitate about community, specifically about communities within the musical community, what community is broadly, who they're for, how to be a part of them, the good, the bad, the ugly, and just some random musings and cogitations on community. The idea came from my day job. And at my day job, the board of directors recently decided that they were going to form a DEI committee or a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. And they got stuck on trying to define community. And I really have no idea as to why they got stuck on this. Like, they've had several meetings and they're still trying to define community. So again, I don't know why they got stuck on this. And I want to do an episode on this show and on another show that I'm working on, not musically cogitating, but with another person, about board of directors and their effectiveness and all of that jazz. But today we're going to just really focus on community. And so they asked us, like some of the staff members, how we defined community. And after they asked me, I realized that I didn't really have a good personal definition of community or a definition that was suitable for this context or really any context. So now I think I'm going to define community really broadly and quite briefly, and then move on to talk about the music community, if there's such a thing, and all that stuff. And of course, I do believe that there is a music community, but more on that just a little bit later. So I'll share two of the about 10 or so definitions that you'll find when you do a Google search to attempt to define community. But community is defined as, one, a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common, or it is a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. And I think that these definitions they're fine. They're broad. And sure, I'm not really expecting too much from the dictionary there because I'm just not. So before looking this up, my personal definition of community was pretty much just yes. People have shared goals, values, common interests, themes. Pretty much if a group of people were into a certain thing or lived in a certain place, I considered that community. And I still kind of do. But after thinking about this a little bit more, I think that my definition and my understanding of community is a little bit more personal, but in a good way. And I think everyone should have personal definitions and understandings of different words and themes. Why community, though? Why not network or some other really broadly defined word that can describe a group of people with shared interests or who have a common goal? And in the future, I'm going to do an episode on networks, but according to several places on the internet, a network is more transactional. You're in a network of someone's, or someone is in your network because you have something to offer them and they have something to offer you, while community is about people. It's about belief. It's about belonging and understanding. And that's what I really love about community. I think community is about people who can come together to understand each other and to believe in each other and to support each other. And I think that's really important. For me, I do like the word community because it is broad, and broad isn't bad although sometimes it is. In this particular case, I really think that we can use the idea of and definition of community broadly to be a positive thing. You know, the mission of the Margins Guitar Collective, of which I'm the artistic and executive director, is to support and create a diverse guitar community. So by definition, our work and our mission is to serve the guitar community, not the electric guitar community, not the classical guitar community, or the 7-string guitar community. Although we could, our mission is the guitar community. It's broad and it's not as defined on purpose because we want this space to be for everybody. That community is for you. It's for your parents. It's for your family. It's for your 6th grade guitar teacher. It's for your D&D group that you meet on Friday nights. Like, that's who that community is for. And I'm trying to make sure that that space is for everyone. When you come to a Margins Guitar Collective concert, I want it to feel as though the people are welcomed into that community, in that space. And that's important for me, and that's everything. So sure, not every community is for everyone, and it shouldn't be that way, but in some ways it should. Everyone won't want to come to a MGC concert, right? They won't want to play in your Dungeons and Dragons group on Friday night. They won't want to run a marathon with you, and that's okay because people have different interests. But when it comes to being a part of that community, if they want to be, I think they should be able to be. And that gets a little bit towards, you know, topics around inclusion. Again, something I'll talk about later in a different episode, but it's there and it should be mentioned. But what happens when things are too broad or too undefined? What happens when you open up a community to almost anyone, like I've said that you should do? Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? And what do we really have to gain from that? How communities are formed is important too, right? I find that a lot of communities that I belong to have come to exist out of otherness. Our shared ideas, identities, thoughts, beliefs, and understandings were so different of that from the dominant power structure or norm that our otherness helped us to find a community in each other. And this otherness in some communities, I think, helps them thrive. Like we have said, yes, we, the others, are now here. We're beautiful. We're going to thrive. Watch us parade around and show you why we're beautiful. Like, that's how I think a lot of communities, good or bad, have come to be created. And I believe that communities also ultimately exist to be spaces for creativity, for, again, understanding, belonging, belief, imagination, and for meeting. They should be free to join, and even more importantly, I think they should be free to exit. I mean, think about the songwriting community, for instance, of which I don't really consider myself a part, and that's probably a good thing because my angst probably wouldn't go over too well on the top 40 charts. But that community exists around songwriting, songwriters, people who enjoy songs, people who write them, probably some haters in that group too, but they're all there because of their vested interest in songs and how they're written. And that's kind of fascinating to me. In the same way as a songwriting community or the guitar community of which I am a part, we exist in a lot of ways to serve ourselves, which brings up another point, right? I'm bringing up so many points, y'all, today. I think I'm on like point fire. But anyway, who do communities serve? And do communities exist to serve each other and themselves, or are they served primarily by others and by outside forces. Like all of these questions that I've tried to answer but are really rhetorical, the answer is probably yes and, right? Like communities serve themselves, but they serve each other, and some aren't served by other ones. It's all really complicated, but I think the complicated is okay. Communities exist to serve themselves, but can and are often served by additional outside forces. When you work in community organizing or in a public service organization or in a nonprofit, the existence of your work, of you being there, is that you work to provide a service and a need to a community that is not being served in most cases by some form of government. So that organization intercedes on behalf of that population or community to serve it, to make it better, and to give it whatever else it needs. But through this idea of self-service and outside service, who decides who gets to be part of that community? Who gets to be a part of the guitar community or the music community? I'm basically asking, who are the gatekeepers? Because they exist in every community. Trust me, I've met some of them in all of the different communities that I've been in, and we have work to do. But they often really negatively impact the growth and expansion of a community. Some of these gatekeepers are inside of those communities. Again, like I said, which is a bit strange to think about, but I think a lot of their gatekeeping ultimately does come from outside of the community in an attempt to continue to oppress people, because oppression is a thing and it's very real. Going back to service, though, I learned probably 3, 4, 5 years ago that the best way as an outsider to serve a community is to go to that community and ask them what it is that they need. Ask what it is that they feel like would make their community better, and then provide that service after they've told you. If you're not a part of a particular community, unless you've done a lot of research, I'm not sure that you as an outsider can adequately determine that community's needs. Like, is that really possible? I'm not sure. Some people would say yes, and some people would say no, and that's fine. I don't think there has to be always a yes or no answer, but just always remember that when you decide that you want to serve a community, music related or not, it is up to that community to decide what they need and what's in their best interests. Again, going back to some of the communities that exist, it's interesting how people on the internet have especially begun to create communities around a thing. And by a thing, I mean literally any and everything has a community on the internet, which is actually pretty cool, especially in a time where so many of us are experiencing deep social isolation. Right? The internet gives us the chance, the opportunity to be connected to people who have similar interests. It's our community. Various types of social media and their different platforms really help to foster and create that community. I think these types of community, for instance, even the one around the Musically Cogitating podcast that we have here, are really self-serving and self-giving in the best possible ways. And it's beautiful to see people coming together over one thing for one purpose or for one movement. And of course, I'm hoping that people are coming together over good and positive things. So I think that kind of goes without saying. This isn't perfect, though, because what is? In the article, which will be linked in the show notes, titled, "What Does Community Mean? A Definition, an Attempt, and a Conversation Starter," the writer of the article says that most communities aren't real communities, and that the word has been hijacked by marketing and media, and that the definition is also too broad. A point which I've already stated for me is important. The broadness of what community is and how it's formed, I believe, is a strength, because that flexibility and understanding of communities and how they are formed allows for their growth and for their continued existence, and it allows for them to thrive. So bringing it back to musical communities, because after all, this podcast is about music in some way all the time. I think that the classical music community is having a bit of an identity crisis, though, because we cannot decide on anything. We can't decide if Beethoven is canceled or even what to call our music. Is it a new music community? Is it a living music community? Is it an academic music community? No one really knows. All we know is that we do music. And I think sometimes we cannot even decide what music is. Like, is it organized sound? Is it this? Is it that? I don't know. And I'm not sure that we have to know, but I do think that our collective inability to decide even what to call ourselves is hindering our ability to be this diverse and open and accepting creative community that we all think we are. I think that communities, while they don't always require a name, the name helps for people inside of and outside of the community to understand what that community is about and what it stands for. So the music community needs to kind of figure that out, really, though. So I come to the end of this episode probably with more questions than when I began. And I think that is okay. These are cogitations, right? These are ruminations. These are thoughts on community and what it means to be in the community, music or not. Although a lot of things in my life personally are centered around music, and I love that. I designed my life in a way, if you will, for it to be that way, because that's what I wanted and that's what I love. So yes, this is about community, but it's also about music. And all of this, though, I just wanted to take some time to think about communities, especially in a time where we're all thinking about the communities that we belong to, what communities we're going to join when it's safe to be in a space with more than 10 people, all of that stuff, who they are for, why do they exist, what it means, and all that jazz. Because music, y'all. So I cannot wait to hear your thoughts on community. Don't forget to follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and at the website. We also have a newsletter which you can subscribe to, where you will receive some additional and bonus content from the show. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please give the show a like, rating, and review, as it helps me to make the show better. And that's all for today, folks. I hope that you had a good one. Have a good one. I had a great time talking to you about community. And I will be back in 2 weeks with the next episode. Until then, bye-bye.